Sorry, everyone who's just got a jump start there. Welcome. I will let you all come into the room. This is actually my first time seeing you all in the Mezo Hackathon because I've been off for the last couple of days. But I hope you've had a really good first week of the hackathon. We have our final workshop today, which is on data made easy under the hood with Goldsky. And we have Andrew with us to come and deliver our workshop. So please welcome Andrew to the stage and we will jump right in. At the end of the session, I'll also talk through the next steps in the hackathon because we're deep into the building period now. So Andrew, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Rebecca. Happy to be here. Alrighty, should I just dive in, share my screen, and just kind of get to it?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Alrighty, let me go ahead and share my screen. Cool. So today we're going to be talking about basically how you can, utilize Mezo data to build your dApps, and how you can also use Goldsky to look at Bitcoin data as well, because I know that that's definitely a really big part of this world. So we're going to dive into that. And before we do, just kind of wanted to give a quick intro on myself. So I'm on the customer success team, and pretty much what I get to do is work with the various ecosystems that we support. So whether it's a chain or like a protocol or a dApp or just any kind of ecosystem, I kind of just try and figure out, how are people using the indexing and how can we make it easier. So I'll do workshops like this, developer documentations, talk to teams, just kind of dive in and really figure out how do we just make it, as seamless as possible and eliminate all the headaches of building with crypto data. Because as a lot of you, I'm sure, are aware, as you're building out whatever you're making, there's a lot of challenges in working with crypto data, and it's not always, super straightforward how to use it and what to do. So we are on the frontier of pretty cool new stuff. So making data easier is pretty much what I'm here to try and do. So today, just to kind of give you a quick overview of the topics we're going to cover. One is what even is indexing, right? Like what is even the benefit of this? What's the purpose? What are subgraphs? That is one of the methods you can index. And what are pipelines? That is another way that Goldsky has been really, really seeing a lot of great traction with, and it's much more scalable and performant. So in a quick overview, indexing is basically, an alternative to just using a direct RPC call. And we're going to talk about like why you might want to do that and where it might be more useful. Subgraphs, they're essentially just these super simple endpoints. It's like a URL that you can query, and then it just pulls the data that you need. So essentially you point at a specific smart contract, you get the endpoint, and then you query it, and it gives you the data. So you can plug that into a dashboard, plug that into your front end. And then pipelines, they work in a similar way. It's also going to be indexing, but rather than having an endpoint that you query, it's actually creating these data streaming pipelines that are going to push the data into your database, and then you would query your database. So we'll go over, some more specifics about all of that, and I'll do a quick demo showing you. But to just kind of kick things off, so why would you want to index in the first place, right? So I think a few things to kind of point out is when you're making RPC calls, oftentimes it's going to be a lot of complicated block data that you're going to get back. And, for example, you're going to see transaction hash, log index, address, block number. It's a whole lot of stuff. None of it's decoded. It's all really just kind of raw data. And it's difficult to, make use of that sometimes or build out an application based on that. Maybe really simple RPC calls are going to be fine. But as you're starting to build out more complex use cases and scale your app, this is where things kind of get a little bit more challenging. So it's more complicated to just do direct RPC calls versus indexing, because indexing just really simplifies the data, makes it much more usable and readable. And then when it comes to efficiency too, like if you're going to be scaling your app, RPCs are often going to be rate limited, and it's just not going to be as optimized when you're really trying to make a really snappy, smooth experience. So to kind of give you an overview of the differences. So when it comes to querying, RPCs are just going to be simple lookups. It's not going to be very complex. But indexing, it's essentially designed to be queried. And it really is just meant for, searching for specifically what you need, whether it's a contract, a wallet, a liquidity pool. Like it's really designed to be queried just based on how the data is structured. And so that makes the performance a lot more optimized, because it's meant to be queried. Whereas with RPCs, it's just going to be slow and rate limited, and it's not necessarily designed for more complex use cases. Now, you might think that, oh, if it's much faster and much more customizable, it's actually more effort. But believe it or not, it's actually even easier and it's super simple. And I'll show you just how quick you can deploy Subgraph in like 30 seconds. So it's a lot easier. It's a lot more efficient. It's going to optimize for scalability and it's automatic decoding. So overall, basically the experience when it comes to, beyond just super, super simple things, indexing is going to be just much more efficient as an experience, as just, the performance overall. And it's usually going to be the way to go. So the way that a subgraph works is essentially it's going to be scraping the network to essentially extract the data and convert it into these organized, what we call entities. And entities, they could be something like a mint, a burn, a transfer, right? It's essentially taking what's happening on chain and using it or converting it into like this blueprint of usable data that's just mapped out. And it's this structured, customized, data structure that is essentially designed to be queried. So that data structure is stored off chain and database. And then once the endpoint is queried, it's basically just going to spit it out in a really quick and easy way. So when you are querying subgraphs, it's basically going to just be the most efficient, easy way to get the data. And there's a lot of cool features, for example, like webhooks and tags, which I'll go into. And they're just going to make it so that the developer experience is just more smooth. So I'm going to go ahead and hop out of these slides and do a quick demo. So this is the Goldsky UI. If you haven't been to our website yet, I recommend maybe just sign up. You can sign up for free and you can follow along with the demo, but app.goldsky.com. There's a free plan. So basically you can still do a decent amount before you hit data limits and then you get charged. So definitely would recommend playing around, deploying a couple subgraphs, make a pipeline, but it's super easy. So when you want to deploy subgraph, you just hit new subgraph and you'll see this pop up with a few things you got to fill in. So for this, we're going to go with Mezo demo as the name. And for the contract address, I know you guys are working a lot with MUSD, so I'm going to use that as an example here. So basically what you're going to want to do is go to the block explorer, and I'm at the MUSD contract token page. So basically you just go ahead, copy that contract, drop it in here, number one. Number two, you're just going to select the network. So here we're going to go Mezo. And the other two, so block and contract ABI. So start block, when you're querying a subgraph, the more data it is, the slower it will take to load it up. So if you want it to just be kind of snappy and faster, maybe you'll go from like the most recent block, but if you need historical data, you can just make it at the start of the contract. So for this example, I'm just going to go use this most recent block right here. It says last balance update. So I'm going to click that and drop it in there. And then last but not least is the ABI. Now, this is a super important part. Essentially what the ABI does is it helps you basically make that blueprint to map out what the entities are going to be. So let me just refresh the page. It's loading a little slow. But basically like the ABI, for most ERC20 contracts, it's going to be the same. It's really common that it's just going to be the same for anything ERC20 because it's almost like a general framework. So one thing to keep in mind, by the way, when you are looking at the contract, you want to make sure that it's not a proxy. Proxy, basically, sometimes there might be like multiple versions of a contract on various chains. So if it is a proxy, it might be pointing to the original contract. So you want to make sure that you're using the original contract. But for this specific example, it says here, contract source code verified, exact match. So that is what we want. So basically, we go to contract ABI, and you'll see all this over here. And all these different names, like these are going to be pretty much the entities. So yeah, you copy that, drop it in here, deploy subgraph. And that all took even longer than it should just because I was explaining stuff. So if you just already know what you need and you just deploy it, you can literally do it in like 30 seconds. Super cool. And so when you deploy a subgraph, you're going to get this page, which is going to give you metrics on, the amount of entities currently stored, the amount of API requests you're doing, handler count, all of that cool stuff. And it shows you here, like, these are the different entities available for the contract. So for this one specifically, it's going to be tracking approvals, burn list addresses added, removed, mint list address added and removed, right? Ownership transferred. So the majority of what's happening on this contract is just, at least so far, what's been indexed, transfers and approvals. But this will all populate as, more stuff kind of gets ingested in there. But every single subgraph will have its own public GraphQL link. So you'll see here Mezo demo 1.0.0, and it looks something like this. So I already deployed a subgraph yesterday so that it can be loaded up already with data. And I wanted to use this just as an example. So as you can see, the other one, it was kind of still filling up, but this one, it shows the amount of different entities that have been captured by the subgraph, the amount of times the requests have been called, and it shows a bunch of logs of just like what's happening. So a ton of really helpful data to just kind of give you insights into what's going on with the subgraph. But as an example, I have a couple queries that I wanted to run that I'm going to show you. So this first one is basically intended to track large transfers. I call it just like the whale watch. So when you run this query, it's going to show all this information here. And just to kind of give you, for reference, like this endpoint, when you're using it, you're probably not just going to be on this page just querying like this. This is just like a visualization showing you the data that you can use. But typically, it's going to be like your front end's going to call this endpoint and use this data, or your dashboard's going to populate stuff on it based on this. But you're not going to just sit here and just like search for data, unless that's what you want to do. Maybe you want to do that and you're curious. So this is just kind of like a visualization so you can test and so you can see. But as you can see here, it's showing me 10 different transfers ordered by value, descending order. So you see it's like the from address, to address, the value, the block number, transaction hash. So ton of really valuable data. And another cool query, as an example, is if you want to search for a specific address. So as an example, let's say maybe we go here, we'll copy this address here. And I'm going to copy my other query. And we're going to use that address. So now we run this, and now we're seeing all the stuff from that address, right? So when you have a subgraph and you have specific data in mind, it all just depends on what you query. And it's just going to spit out a bunch of really helpful stuff, just depending on what you put in. So here, it's showing the from address that we did here, the value, the block. So, now if you want to track a specific whale, you can do that first query to get insights on like who the whales are, and then pick a specific address from there. And then you can see all the transfers and all the activity for that address. So really cool way to just track activity. But yeah, that's essentially subgraphs. And final couple notes on that. If you use a tag, one thing that's really useful about tags is, let's say you have in your front end 5 or 10 different places that are calling this endpoint, but you have right here, as you see, it's like Mezo MUSD 1.0.0. So let's say you deploy a new version where you change something a little bit, and then you have version 2.0. Rather than going into your front end and then replacing all the URLs from 1.0 to 2.0, what you can do is use tags so that it's just prod, and then any new version is just going to point to this tag. So that way, if you're making changes and deploying new versions, you don't have to change anything in your code base. This is just like a really small thing, but it's like, it removes some headaches when you're building out. And then last but not least is webhooks. And webhooks are just a super cool way to basically, trigger actions based on certain on-chain events. So like, let's say you want a certain, notification to happen in your app, or a certain action to happen, in your protocol once something happens on chain. Then you can just create webhooks, and possibilities are pretty endless. Webhooks are very useful and powerful tool. Alrighty, well, that's subgraphs. Now we're going to dive back in and talk a little bit about why maybe you'd want to not use subgraphs. So when it comes to some more powerful, hold on.
Andrew, I'm not sure if it's my Wi-Fi or your Wi-Fi, but I think you just froze.
Quick mic check, Rebecca. Do you still see me, or am I frozen a little bit?
You froze. I can see you now, but you aren't moving. Can you wave so I can see if you're frozen? Okay, yeah, now you're moving. Yeah, I think
Cool.
we're back.
Okay, I think we're back. Okay, perfect. All right, time to carry on. So when it comes to subgraphs, they are very powerful, but they can get limited when you have certain types of use cases. And some of those would include if you're trying to combine data from various chains, if you're a multi-chain app, such as in this example, Mezo and Bitcoin, right? Another would be if you want to combine off-chain data with on-chain data. And as your application starts to scale, like for example, we work with Polymarket, and initially they were using subgraphs, but performance just basically was not able to keep up with their crazy amount of load. I mean, Polymarket's a huge application. So this is kind of what sparked the need for a different solution, which we called Mirror. And that's basically these data streaming pipelines, which take a data source, whether it's a specific data set or a subgraph or whatever it is, and it pushes that data into a database. So Mirror is pretty much the V1, and now what we have is called Turbo Pipelines. It's like the V2 of Mirror. We just released this in the last month or two. And so to kind of give you an insights of like what you can expect with pipelines. So it's real-time streaming to a database. So as things are happening on chain, it's just going to be pushed directly to your database. And it's going to be super, super fast because, you know, you're not querying an endpoint, you're querying your database directly. So essentially it's like as the data is there, it's immediately available. And you have full control over the data because it's stored in your own database. So once it's in there, it's yours forever. And you just have to backfill it that one time and then, you know, keep streaming it as it's happening. But yeah, I mean, the multi-chain, off-chain data element, it's really cool because essentially you can choose multiple different data sources and aggregate it all into one table. So that basically when you query, you're just querying one table and then everything is in there. So it's really designed for scalability, for speed, you know, whether it's historical data that you're looking at, whether it's edge streaming of data for, you know, current events and just watching things as they unfold. It's just a lot more scalable and a lot more flexibility on what you can do. And I'm going to show you how to do that. So when you do new pipeline, you're going to be taken to what we call the flow editor. And this is just basically like a really simple drag and drop type of experience where you kind of add blocks and you build it out. And it just in the background will create this configuration file, your YAML configuration file. So for example, we're going to drop over here Mezo, and you'll see there's a bunch of different data sets. So basically these are like pre-ingested data sets that are curated for specific use cases. So ERC20 is probably going to be a really great one, just as an example. You can start indexing either at the beginning of the chain or at current, but pretty much you just choose your source, which network you want, which data set you want, and then you can either put that directly into a sink. So let's say you just want to, you know, import and push all of your data. You don't want to filter anything. You can just do that. Just go straight to the sink, and then you can query everything in your database, and it's super simple. But of course, if you want to be mindful of the amount of data being pushed in because you want to reduce costs, you want to be more efficient, which is definitely recommended. There's different ways that you can modify the data. So you can do custom SQL, HTTP handler, you can use TypeScript. Dynamic table is very cool because you can essentially modify it without redeploying it. So very, very popular use case. But custom SQL is probably the most standard. So basically, this is where you would just, before actually putting the data into your database, you would query it so that you would essentially filter it to be more granular to the data that you need. So let's say there's like a specific address you want to filter for, a specific, you know, timestamp. You can get really, really custom about the data. And then once you have figured out, you know, what data you want, which data source you're looking to use, that's when you add your sink, and then you basically just connect it. And when you deploy, boom, it's all in your database. And I actually already deployed, as an example, a few pipelines. And I wanted to just go over some of that data just to show you like what it can look like, what you can query. So let me go ahead and delete that, get out of here. So this first one over here is just like a really simple one called Mezo transfers. And I'll go ahead and show you as an example. So when you do deploy a pipeline, this is kind of what the building blocks as you're placing them will build on, in the backend with the YAML config file. But as a reference, like when I go and update and I go into it, you'll see like this is what was built out, right? So it's pretty much exactly like we were just doing, where you have your data source, you have the SQL, and how you're filtering it out, and then you have the sink, which is where you're putting all of that data. So I'm going to go over here to the left and show you what that data looks like in the database. So this is just the raw table of the ERC20 transfers that I put there. So ton of data, and there's pretty cool things you can query. So as an example, this is just a query that I ran earlier where it basically queries the transfers table and returns top 25 addresses ordered by total MUSD sent, right? So basically it's showing us like who are the biggest senders, how much they're moving. Essentially, it's the same whale tracker from the subgraph, only now it's data that is in our database and we're querying that directly. So you can see it's just kind of showing only what you need, the sender and total sent. Whereas when you do look at the data table directly, there's like a lot more data, but you might not need all of that, right? So essentially, this just makes it a really clean way to get exactly what you want. So this is one example query. You can do top 25 just to show you who the whales are. And then that same example from earlier where it's like, okay, well, let's say I want to use a specific address. So you can run that same query in here as well. So in the database, I put in an address and I'm just searching up, information about what that address is doing. So whether you want to look at a more high level type of overview, or if you want to get really specific about specific contracts, specific wallets, you can use both a subgraph or a pipeline and basically achieve the same thing. It just depends on your use case, your scalability, whether you prefer an endpoint, whether you want to own the data, if speed is super important, or whatever is the use case for you. There's a lot of different ways to get really custom about how you do that. So yeah, that's just like a really simple deployment of just looking at some Mezo data. But obviously, you guys are building out with more than just Mezo data. You guys are also looking at some Bitcoin data. And so I kind of want to talk a little bit about, what you could possibly do with, with pipelines. Because, for example, with subgraphs, you can only do Mezo data. You can't actually use a subgraph for Bitcoin. Subgraphs, just by the nature of how they're designed, are EVM only. But with indexing, you can go non-EVM. So, for example, turbo pipelines were created with the intention of being fast enough to handle Solana data. So Bitcoin data is also possible just because of the architecture. So, for example, this Bitcoin Mezo activity pipeline, this is what the YAML config file looks like. And it's a little more complex. And I will actually show you how I made this. I didn't write any of this. I used what we call our AI skill, where it's a skill in Claude. And I basically talk to it and I tell it, this is what I want you to build. These are the data sets I want you to use. Just make it. And so Claude actually wrote this entire YAML config file. And I don't actually know what any of this means. So if you're not really familiar with deploying, no problem. You can just use the Claude skill and it will do it for you. And it's super cool. But to show you in the database what that looks like, so this is like the raw table of the Bitcoin Mezo activity. And I queried here just to show you like what you can do with some of that data. So this one, it's basically showing the Bitcoin block production alongside Mezo activity. So it's almost like a window into what's happening simultaneously. And it's kind of cool because you can see, maybe when transfers are happening, when there's some, amount is spiking relative to Bitcoin block cadence or MUSD loans. Like you can kind of see like timeline wise, like when is stuff happening. And that's a little bit what this data is speaking to right here. But I also wanted to take it a step further, and I deployed a third pipeline, which was I called BTC MUSD loans, where I kind of want to see, with any kind of Bitcoin uses collateral and then MUSD used in the loan, like what is kind of happening as far as that whole borrowing piece. And so I deployed this other table here, which is BTC MUSD loan activity. So this is just kind of giving insights into when a loan was issued. And I kind of made this query to track that, right? So this kind of tells you like when MUSD is borrowed, which is like the nearest Bitcoin block and transactions at that time. So this, if you were to really just analyze this data, would kind of give you insights into like, okay, this is what's happening on the Bitcoin network. This is what's happening on Mezo network. And this is the story behind what's happening with these loans and this collateral movement. So very, very cool insights. You could probably build some pretty cool visuals and dashboards and front ends based on this. So a lot of very awesome applications as far as, when you have all this data, you're really just limited to the creativity of what are you going to query? How are you going to filter it? What are you going to do? So that's essentially subgraphs and pipelines. And I wanted to also show you, I have this little animation, so I'm just going to show you the robots. But I wanted to show you how to use the AI skills in Claude, because it's been like one of my favorite things to do. And I feel so much more powerful now that I could just talk to Claude and tell it to deploy stuff. So I never have to ask our tech services guys to help give me examples and create things for demos, because now I could just do this with Claude. So it's super cool. And so I got Claude Code open here. I'll go ahead and zoom in a little bit just so that it's easier for you guys to see. This is super zoomed in. It's weird for me. I hope it's nice for you. But you can see I kind of been talking to it all day today, and I will basically tell it like, all right, I want to replicate the same query from my subgraph to the pipelines. And it basically is like, okay. And I'm like talking to it, asking it, and it's showing me all this stuff. But let's say, for example, I want to deploy something new. So let's say deploy a turbo pipeline combining Bitcoin data, Mezo data, and filter it for large whale activity. We'll say call the pipeline live demo Claude. All right. Now we let it cook. So what's pretty cool is when you install the AI skill on Claude, you log in with your project, it connects to your project. So basically you can like talk to your project where you tell it to list off the various deployments, create deployments, go into existing deployments and debug them if there's any problems. And you can even connect to your database and within here, just query it directly and it'll show you results. So super, super cool because it really just abstracts the entire workflow into this conversation you're just having with Claude. And you can even ask it for advice. It's like, okay, this is the use case I have. How would I build a pipeline to make it happen? Or this is a subgraph I deployed. I want to make it a pipeline now. Like, what do I do? How do I convert it? How do I migrate over? So very, very powerful tool. And if you're not already using Claude Code for everything you do, which I imagine a lot of you are, would definitely suggest it. So here it is. It's basically doing some testing in the background where it's just validating that whatever it's creating, the config file is accurate. So that's what it means here, running validate live demo Claude pipeline. I'm curious actually if I click that, will it show me a little more? Okay, not yet, but green looks good. Plus 70 green, I think that's a good thing. So it's doing its own thing. And yeah, we'll just give it a second. But yeah, just to kind of show you some stuff from earlier, all these different queries, the examples that I was showing you in the database, it wrote them for me. I pretty much said, the pipelines that I deployed, I want to, for my demo, show some good queries and, give example data. So it wrote that for me. So it's really, really helpful as basically like, your right-hand man. If you want it to deploy, to debug, to help you just even get creative, it's really effective. All right, now it's running it. Cool. So now it's telling me and giving me some insights into what it created. So it's looking at these event types: whale transfer, whale mint. So any MUSD transfer bigger than 10,000 MUSD, if there's a loan issued greater than that, if there's a repayment. Cool. All right, why don't we go back now to my pipelines. And you can see here live demo Claude, so that was deployed. And chains Bitcoin and Mezo, very cool. Last updated literally less than a minute ago. So when we go into here, it's now live, and it is already writing the records into the database. Shows you the data sets, Bitcoin blocks, Mezo ERC20. This is the config file that it was created. So it's Bitcoin blocks starting at the earliest, Mezo transfer starting at the earliest. And it wrote these queries to basically optimize for the whale data that we're wanting. So super cool. And it put it into the hosted Postgres database. All right, so now let's take a look here into the database. We're going to refresh that. Got this new table, live demo Claude. Click into that guy. All right, so we got all this data here. I think it's still populating stuff. I'm seeing a bunch of stuff say empty, so it's probably still working its magic. But Claude suggests for the demo, I do that query. So I will listen to that suggestion. Let's see what it does. All right. So maybe this column and this column, it made a mistake or something. Maybe I need to talk to it to kind of, modify a little bit. But yeah, so it's showing me some data based on the deployment. And that was all super fast and super easy. And highly suggest doing that. Anyways, if you have any questions, I know I just spit out a lot of information to you guys. Don't hesitate to reach out. Here is what you can do next. You can reach out to me on Telegram, shoot me an email. Definitely should go on docs.goldsky.com. I would suggest looking through our guides. They're very thorough and there's a ton of examples in there and a lot of steps to just kind of walk you through. And one thing that I feel I should mention, literally as of, I don't know if it was this week or next week, or sorry, this week or last week, we just added this Ask Goldsky AI thing where it's pretty much the Claude skill just in here, which is kind of nuts. Like I was talking to it earlier and it just did that. So I haven't even really used this that much because it's so brand new, but I would recommend playing with that too. If you don't use Claude and you want to go the vibe coding route, try Goldsky AI. Super, super cool. I mean, it's going to get to a point where like you're just talking to the web app and it's just building stuff for you. So you don't even have to know what you're doing and you can use the data. Alrighty, I'm going to stop there. I'm going to go back to the call and stop sharing my screen.
Thank you, Andrew. Do you have a good link or guide to share for how people can access the Claude skill? Maybe I'm just a novice here, but I'm not sure how you access a Claude skill in your Claude code. So maybe some of our builders will have a similar question. So any relevant documentation for that would be helpful. While you were talking, nice. While you were talking, there are a couple of questions earlier on in the session. I think you did sort of cover them, but also it's good to cover it again anyway. So very early on, Tay asked, would we always choose indexing over RPCs, or is it better for certain use cases?
Yeah, I think generally it's always going to be better because it's just going to be faster and more efficient. I think that if you have like a really simple use case, like I can't think off the top of my head, but something like very, very simple, just a quick lookup, an RPC call could be helpful. But I think it's one of those things where because really, really simple, small subgraphs, like you have like a set amount that's free. There's really no costs that are incurred for using a small subgraph for like really simple stuff. So I would probably suggest that even if for basic initial use cases, if an RPC call is sufficient, it's probably better to build a foundation for your infrastructure to be ready for scalability, because you don't want to build out in the beginning an app that relies on RPC calls while it's small, and then things unexpectedly explode and you have all this usage and now you're hitting all these scalability issues, and I have to build from the ground up to support that kind of performance. So it's like a best practice kind of thing. from my perspective, where RPC calls can definitely be sufficient for a lot of basic use cases. It's just when you need scalability, it's sometimes like, oh, I need this now, and now I have to like rethink how everything was made and start from scratch, and so it's just, I think it's one of those things to kind of save you headaches down the line. I mean, it'd be a great problem to have if there's too many people using your app, but it's better to assume that will be a problem and build for that from the start.
Do you think that maybe not at the state that it's in now, but in the future, if people did face that problem, would the AI skill help people switch over if they had the kind of the current setup with RPCs? Would you be able to then convert over?
Totally. I think you could literally copy all the endpoints you use for RPCs, drop it in the skill, be like, I currently use this, but I'm hitting scalability issues. Like, help. What do I do? How do I turn this into subgraph deployments? And it'll just be like, no problem. Claude thinking, whatever, blah, blah, blah. And it'll spit out a solution and it'll just deploy it for you. So
nice. It's good AI skill to have.
yeah.
The other question that was asked earlier on was from Cal, and they asked, if we use the first block, will it cost more or be more, or be inefficient? I think this was to do with setting up the subgraph initially.
Yeah. It really depends on the size of the chain. So obviously for Mezo, it'd be different than something like Ethereum, right? I think a good place to go for you to just get like a good insight on what you can expect cost-wise. Here, let me link you to our pricing calculator, because there's like this little drag and drop thing you can do where you can choose, for example, like the number of subgraphs, entities stored, and it'll give you a better picture of like what costs will look like. But yeah, if you're going to go from the very first block, it's just more data. So it will cost more. But again, when it comes to subgraphs, you do have a set amount of, what we call entities, which is what costs break down by. You have a set amount of entities that you can use for free. So like the first 100,000 entities, they're free. So really, it just kind of depends on the amount of data. But naturally, if you're using more data, and that's going to incur more costs.
Yeah, and I guess also it depends on the use case. If you need backdated information, then you're going to have to, even if it costs more.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice. Okay. They were the questions we had during the session. Thank you, Andrew, for coming and delivering that workshop. It's always great, from my perspective, having seen you deliver workshops over the course of various hackathons, and seeing all the upgrades that have been made recently is really cool. So the developer experience in this one is going to be absolutely amazing, I can tell. Thank you for coming and running that session. Hopefully people will rewatch if needed, and check out all the links as well. As they start to integrate Goldsky within the apps that they're building, because now that was the end of our workshop week for the start of the hackathon, and we're deep into the building period now. So next week is our first checkpoint. That's the project creation and team formation checkpoint. So everyone needs to make sure that they've finalized or decided what project they're building. They've finalize their team, and they submit for the first checkpoint, and that is creating the project and sharing their idea. If these details change later, you can update them, but we still recommend submitting at the first checkpoint anyway to be prepared. So that deadline is coming up next week. And then an important thing to remember in the Mezo Hackathon this time is that we have a 6-week build period instead of 4. So if you were here for the last Mezo Hackathon, this time you have 1.5 times as long. So we expect amazing things to come out of your time, because you should have sufficient time to build something really cool. We're at the end of week 1 now, so that means we have 5 weeks left. So if you're just getting started, if you're still in ideation, there's still plenty of time. I hope everyone is looking forward to the time ahead, the building period ahead. And I've seen already lots of people in the Discord asking for mentorship, asking for developer support. Please do stick around there. If you're not already in the Discord, make sure that you connect in the platform. so that you can ask the Mezo team any of your questions. As for the tooling partners, they all have individual contacts as well. So if you have questions about Goldsky, the person to go to is Andrew. And some of our workshops earlier in the week as well, we have separate people for support there. Other than that, unless anyone has any questions at the end of this workshop, we will end it here and we'll go into, it's not quite the weekend yet, but we'll go into the first weekend of the hackathon building period. The next time that I will see you live is about midway through the hackathon. We're going to have a really useful workshop on how to pitch your product. So this is going to be focusing on the fundamentals that you need to think about when delivering your pitch, which you're going to be submitting in your final submission. This is to make sure that you, after working so hard on your project, are presenting it in the right way so that you catch the judge's eye and hopefully win something. So that is the next time that I will see you face to face. But in the meantime, I'll be in contact with you all over Discord, over email. You can always come to me if you have any questions. And of course, the Mezo team as well in the Discord. So yeah, it's been great having you for the first week of the Mezo Hackathon. We will catch up with you very soon, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday.